When we read in literature and in history, we run into all sorts of wonderful terms about money. Things like farthings and halfpennies, shillings, 2 bits, 4 bits. What's going on with all these strange coinages that we hear about in the 18th century? And how do they connect together? That's what we're going to talk about in this episode today. So before we get started, let's think about today's money here in the United States. We have a stretch of kind of bills and coins that we work with every day. The top is the $100 bill. There's nothing bigger than that. We've got 50s, 20s, 10s, 5s, 1s, and then we get down into coinage, right? So we've got quarters, half dollars, sometimes we see half dollars, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies. The stretch between the smallest coin or denomination here and the largest is 10,000 to 1. There are 10,000 pennies in a $100 bill. And we really don't have anything bigger than a $100 bill. And obviously we don't have anything smaller than a penny. But this is what we use for day-to-day transactions. That's what works for us. We don't really need a whole lot of a bigger bill because we use different sorts of means for paying. So what do they have in the 18th century? What's the biggest coin and what's the smallest coin? Let's start at the very top. So we've got golden guineas at the top of the British monetary system. We're going to be talking about Great Britain first because the 13 colonies are all British colonies, and they would have known, even if these coins weren't the ones that were constantly in circulation, they would have known exactly what these coins were. So at the top of the British system here is the golden guinea. Now, it's not the very, very top because there's actually a 5 guinea coin, a great big golden coin as big as a crown. So a 5 guinea piece, a 2 guinea piece, and then I've got something here that is a 1 guinea piece. These would have been gold coinage. They would have been worth an awful lot in the time period. Very similar to having something like a $500 bill or a $1,000 bill. So you can imagine a very large gold coin of this time period. They wouldn't have been, being used in standard transactions day to day very often, certainly. But people would have been familiar with the standard 1 guinea golden coin. There was also a half guinea for a slightly smaller golden coin. So those are the very top coins. They didn't have paper money per se in the British monetary system like we're used to, so they used these precious metals as sort of the top end here. So now let's move down into the silver coinage. Now this is the kind of money that would have definitely been in people's pockets. They would have recognized the silver coinage. The top of the silver coinage here is the crown, the British crown here. This one is from about 1745, and it's a large silver piece. It would be very, very similar to a silver dollar back when we had silver dollars, almost exactly the same sort of size and weight. It's a very, very nice piece to have in your pocket. Really fills it up well, and it has a great sound to it. We're not used to the sound of our coinage nowadays. It just doesn't. It has this kind of thunky sound. Boy, these silver pieces sound wonderful. The crown is the top end. If we sort of try to connect our guineas, it was easy enough to connect 5, 2, and 1. How many guineas works with a crown? Well, there are 4 crowns plus 1 shilling. There's a little boost. We need just a little bit more than 4 crowns to fit in a guinea here. So here's our crown. Next up underneath that is the shilling. Now we've all heard of a shilling. We don't really we would have a good connection with that, do we? It is very, very similar to a quarter in its size, maybe a little bit thinner than a quarter, And the reason why it's a little bit smaller than the quarter, because it's not a quarter of a crown, it's actually a fifth of a crown. It takes 5 of these shillings to be worth 1 crown. Now we'll stop here at this shilling and talk about it for a second. As we've looked at, say, a guinea, and we see this crown, it turns out that they would put the current ruler on these coins. So today in our coinage that we see, we've got past presidents, way past presidents. On these coinage, they're always using the current ruler on here. So the 1745 shilling we've got here has George II on it. The guinea that we were seeing earlier, that's got George III on it, because that's from 1773. Another very, very interesting thing here is that the front and underneath the bust of the king here, there's a little word Lima on here. And this shows up, these little sort of place names show up on multiple British coins in this time frame. This particular word denotes that the silver that this coin was made from was money that was captured by the British at Lima, Peru, in the 1740s. So there was an excursion that went they actually circumnavigated the world, went all the way around the world. The British were attacking the Spanish in South America, up along the coast there, and they went and also attacked treasure ships in the Pacific. They captured a large quantity of silver at Lima, Peru, and to show off one way or the other, they decided to mark the coins. And there were other coins that happened in the time period, like Vigo. It says the same sort of thing, that it was made from the metal that was captured at that place. So this particular coin has the little Lima, Peru notification on it there. As we move through the shilling, we have a sixpence, which is half a shilling, and you can see this coin is it looks exactly the same, same front and back, and it is just half that size. As we're working with these silver coins, their denominations are directly connected with exactly how much weight of silver they have in them. So if you've got a shilling, which is worth 12 pence, and you got a sixpence piece, the sixpence is exactly half the size. There are still a few more silver pieces to go. These shillings and sixpences are pretty thin, pretty small. You could easily sort of lose them in your pocket. The sixpence is getting close to our dime size, but incredibly, they made even smaller silver coins. So here is a 4-pence piece. It's got the little 4 on one side and the ruler on the other side, and we can keep working down. There's a 3-pence and a 2-pence, and then when we finally get down there, there is a golden or a silver penny, which, look at that, it just fits on your fingertip. That's all the bigger that little guy is. These smaller silver coinage probably did not flow in the economy all that much in Great Britain, and it's likely you would almost never see anything like this in the colonies in the Americas. Definitely not as common a piece. And we do have some nice fun names, at least for something like the 4-pence. It was also called the groat in the time period. So if you hear I spent a groat, it's 4-pence. The 3-penny, the 2-penny, or maybe a 2-pence. I'm not sure whether that's used as much in the 18th century as in the 19th century. And then we have our single silver penny there. That's the end of the silver coinage, but then we go down into our copper coinage. So we're used to at least silver looking, silver dollars, half dollars, quarters, dimes, nickels. But when we get down to a penny, we get into copper coinage, and they had copper coinage in the time period, but they didn't have copper pennies. at least Great Britain didn't have until the very, very late part of the 18th century, when they had a large copper, they called them cartwheel pennies. But all through the earlier part of the 18th century, they had halfpennies and farthings. So a halfpenny, there would be, 24 halfpennies in one of those shillings. And here is a halfpenny. It's a nice big sized copper coin. It's got Britannia on the back there with her shield. And then the current ruler on the front there. So this one's George II. And here is a farthing, half that size. And that's a lot closer to our penny, isn't it? So really, really close size, just a little bit bigger than maybe our standard penny. So when we finally get all these denominations connected together, so we go farthing, halfpenny, then we go to shilling and crown and guinea, and then 2 guinea and 5 guinea. The stretch between all those is a little bit more than 5,000 to 1. It's very similar to our 10,000 to 1. Now we might think that that would sort of equate in purchasing power, right? Not really. Their coins were actually worth a good bit more. So our smallest coin is a penny. You can't really buy anything with a penny, can you? So if we take our halfpenny, it has a buying power of about $1. So even their smallest coin is really only goes down to about 50 cents. They didn't have to deal with this tiny little denominations like we do today. They didn't have the same sort of issues with sales tax and whatnot. The only reason why we probably still have pennies. Let's dig in and look at these halfpennies for just a second. This one is a very more early than most of the rest of them here, is 1718 halfpenny. They are it's actually a little thicker than this later one, but they weigh the same amount of copper. This copper in the time period wasn't worth exactly the same amount as the coin is. If we're looking at a silver coin, it has exactly the amount of silver that it's worth, right? So there's a crown's worth of silver in a silver crown. Not true for the copper currency. These are token currencies. There's only about half the amount of copper in a halfpenny than a halfpenny's worth of copper. We have the ruler on here. This is George I instead of George II, like these other ones. And here's an interesting halfpenny right here. This one isn't Irish halfpenny, so instead of having Britannia on the back, it's got the Irish harp on the back. Now, some people didn't like this coin as well, and so this halfpenny was more likely to be exported and to be a coin that you would find in the colonies. The silver coinage was illegal to export, British silver coinage, to the colonies. The copper coinage was not illegal to export from Great Britain into the colonies, and so these copper pieces, which were much more likely to be seen in the colonies, in the English colonies during this 18th century time period. In North America, in the British colonies, we have more than just British coinage, and there really wasn't a whole lot of that flowing through the colonies, but we do have some other ones, important coins that we need to kind of get a grip on, and this is the German thaler. In the 18th century, there was no Germany per se. There were many, many German states. They weren't united as they are today as one Germany. So there are many, many different German coins, but they tend to be very related. And their small coin is the Pfennig, which is similar to a penny, right? And their silver coin, like a silver dollar or the silver crown, is actually the thaler. And that word is very, very similar to the word dollar. They're all related to each other. There's this ancient silver coin that is sort of copied all through Europe, and this German thaler is that. This one's from that 18th century, in fact, the Revolutionary War time period. So we've got our German silver coin. Some of these might have been seen in the colonies. The interesting thing about this particular German coin is the idea that this coin, when it was originally minted, 1778, was likely minted with silver that was paid to this German state for payment of soldiers. So this Hessen Castle thaler is sometimes referred to as a blood money coin because it's made from the silver that was used to purchase the services of those Hessian soldiers. We also have a lot of French coinage that is going through the economy here in North America, and the crown size coin for that here is our French écu. And this one is from 1769. And the French coinage is, again, they do have some coins that are very, very similar in size. Just like that dollar, just like this crown, the écu is almost exactly that same size. This one is in a very, very good shape. So a little bit later in the 18th century, in the 1790s, we have the French Revolution. And one of the things that the new government decides to do is to change not just what the coinage looks like, but the actual denominations themselves, to discard the idea of what an écu was, or change the names and the sizes of the coins to get as much distance from that old royal system to their new system. So they would, while they still had to use some of the coinage from the older regimes, they defaced them. So many of the coins from this time period have scratch marks worn off. They defaced the king here. There are a few scratches here. And even on the back where there are the royal fleur-de-lis symbols on the back, they would wear that off, scratch that off on purpose. This one still is in very good shape, just like it was in the 18th century. They had smaller coinage too, and sort of like the shilling here. We don't see as many of these moving through our economy here in the British colonies, but they are something that we might have seen if we were here in the 18th century. Now, what would we have seen? What's the most common coin that, if we are in the colonies in the 18th century, if someone's going to pay us with a coin, what are we going to have? Well, we are going to have Spanish coinage, or sort of not even Spanish from Spain, but Spanish from South America, Central America, Mexico. Those are the coins that are going to be used the most by the colonies. And here is the Spanish piece of 8. This coin is truly the one that's being used all the time in the colonies, and this coin continued to be used in the United States after the Revolutionary War and continued to be legal tender up until the 1850s. And these traded as 1-for-1 with our silver dollar. And we get our name from the Spanish milled dollar, which this is. It's another word for that same coin. It was called a piece of 8 because it's got a little 8 here. This is an 8 reals coin. So it has, it's a much larger coin than some of the smaller ones, although it's almost exactly the same weight and size as our crown, same size as our silver dollar today, if it was still silver. Here is, they had smaller versions. So like there was a shilling, there's the 1 real coin here. And it's, again, exactly the same size. And just like the British coinage, these coins are measured or denominated by exactly the amount of silver in them. So there is, in this case, $1 worth of silver in this silver dollar. Now, they did also have smaller coinage, some small copper coinage and some smaller silver coinage. We don't see them as much in our economy. So if we don't have small coins, and again, just like I was saying with the British coin, this would be worth an awful lot in the time period. Maybe it's $100 bill. Let's take it as an example. And we can't purchase, we can't use $100 bill to, purchase a soft drink or something. We need to be able to break this money up into smaller pieces. What if we don't have smaller money? They did chop this money up, which we find just very, very difficult to understand, but that's where this idea, if this was an 8 real piece of money or a piece of 8, we can cut it up into 8 pieces and we would get smaller pieces like that. That's where the bits comes from. When you hear somebody saying, oh, that's 4 bits or 2 bits, they're talking about here is a single bit, so our equivalent to 12.5 cents, if that makes any sense at all. We can cut it up into quarters, so we get 2 bits, and if we cut it up in just halves, we get 4 bits. So when we read about bits, we're talking about pieces or pie pieces of these larger chunks of pieces of 8. This idea of cutting the coinage up was fairly early. So there are references to cutting this money up in the very, very early part of the 18th century. And we see the same thing, people talking about the same idea in the early 19th century. So this idea of needing smaller change and what are we going to do about that is a common problem, and cutting these pieces of 8 up was something that happened quite regularly. You can imagine, though, that the accuracy of cutting these is very, very important because the worth is in the silver itself, not in the design or anything else on these coins. So somebody needed to be very careful as they cut their coins up. Because of the issue with the worth being in the coin, people did try to cut pieces off of the coins. They would clip them, or they would try to take little chips off the coins because they could extract some wealth and then continue to trade that coin as if it was in full value. So that's one of the reasons why we have the special coinage, or while this coin is called a milled dollar, it means the edges are milled, and that's to keep people from taking away some of the silver. There's some amazing milling on these. Some of them have words on them. Some of them just sort of lines across the coins to make sure that you're getting all your value in the coin. And if you were concerned about your bits, whether they were truly worth what they were supposed to be worth, you would have a special little scale, and you would be able to weigh your coins to see whether they weighed what they should. In the 17th century and early in the 18th century, the Spanish colonies did not have the equipment to produce a beautiful milled dollar like is used, like we have here. So the equipment was very, very crude to make coins. They would have bar silver poured out that they smelted, and then they would cut it into chunks and mash it with very crude dies and hammers. And this is a piece of cob money from that time period. This cob money weighs the same amount as our piece of 8. It's much thicker, but it's very, very crude. And you can see the individual hammer marks and then the die that struck here in the center. This one's from 1708. And it is, well, you can see it would be very easy to clip off pieces of this cob money if you wanted to extract some of that silver, some of that value. And that's one of the reasons why they went ahead and made the much nicer milled dollar. So this is still a dollar. This is a milled dollar. Whenever we read stories, we dig into history, we think about literature and all sorts of things. We run into these wonderful monetary terms, and sometimes it doesn't make sense unless we understand the monetary system of the time period and exactly what these coins looked like and felt like. So we can dig in and learn so much more about history and all those wonderful pieces of literature when we can see the coins, when we can get an idea about how big they are and how they kind of connect with money today. If you've enjoyed this episode and you want more on money in the 18th century, and it is so wonderful, so complicated, there's so much to learn, you need to check out our 35-minute mini doc on money in the 18th century, whether it's coin or paper money, trading and barter. Make sure to dig in and check out that episode.